What is up? Today we are going to be talking about Alchemized by Sin-Lin Yu. A little bit of backstory. So I went into Barnes & Noble and I was just looking around like I like to do. A lot of times I like to just go in there and then just go off vibes. You know, how am I feeling? I mean, I do judge a book by its cover, so I'll kind of look at the covers and see what looks cool. And I actually I saw this, and this was like a few weeks before I ended up picking it up. I saw it and I thought it looked cool. And I read what it says on the back and then like on the inside cover. And I was like, okay, so this seems like it is a book based off of some sort of necromancy war. There's a prisoner of war story in there. Sounds cool, right? But I didn't end up picking it up that day. And then a few weeks went by and I went back to Barnes & Noble and then I was thinking about this book because, again, I thought the cover looked sick. It was huge, which this still is the longest book I've ever read. It's over 1,000 pages. And I was like, you know what? I think I'm going to pick that book up. And then I ended up asking one of the employees and they were able to find it because I didn't remember what the name of the book was or anything like that. So that is how I came to come in contact with this book. The reason I tell that story is because I realize now, after reading the full book and watching some other videos on it, that there's a lot more to the story than just what is in the book. And I think that it might have helped my experience with this book if I knew at least a little bit about the origins of this book. So if you don't know, I'm assuming you do. But if you don't know, this book came to be from an actual fan fiction of Harry Potter. So it was this fan fiction called Manacled, which was basically a fan fiction about Hermione and Draco Malfoy ended up, getting together and getting in a relationship, right? So that's where this comes from. Obviously, that has all been taken away, and the author Sin-Lin Yu built a world that was completely separate from Harry Potter. But I do think that it might have helped me just understand a little bit more in the story and just in the world in general if I kind of knew that. But yeah, so this is kind of a review of Alchemized from someone that had no idea what this came from and I didn't know anything. I know it's all over Book Talk. It's all over social media. I did not know any of that. So I wanted to share my opinion and my thoughts. I did a video on my Instagram that obviously was pretty short, which I just felt like wasn't able to give all of my thoughts. So I was like, you know what, let's just make a video sharing my experience as someone that read this, that had no idea what I was getting into. So a brief synopsis of the book. Alchemized follows Helena Moreno, who is she is what's called a vivomancer, or like a healer of this group, this faction called the Eternal Flame. And the Eternal Flame was in this war with this necromantic army led by this head necromancer guy. And they had been fighting for years and years and years. And it had been, hard fought battles. And Helena was, healing and just doing all this stuff. And she ends up, basically losing all of her memories. And the way that the book starts is that it starts basically when she comes to and she finds out that she doesn't remember anything in the past 3 years, but this war has been going on longer than that. So she's still aware that there was a war that was going on, and she's kind of like, well, it seems that we have kind of lost, and that's where the book starts. So it's one of those books that it starts with you being very much so in the dark. You have no idea what's going on. Helena has no idea what's going on. And it was for me, it was hard to kind of get into at the start. The book's broken up into 3 different sections. So there's section number 1, part number 1, part number 2, and part number 3. Basically, the way that it works is part number 1 is very, very dark to a point where it was genuinely difficult for me to read. And part 1 takes about 275 pages. So it's a pretty long section of the book where Helena is still completely confused. She doesn't know anything. She never really recovers any of her memories in part 1. So she is just really confused. And I will say the author, Sin-Lin Yu, really does a really good job of making you feel that way. I felt confused, honestly, scared when I was reading part 1. I felt frustrated for Helena. Why is this happening to this person? Because she seemed like a very nice and understanding person, and she was just put in all of these terrible situations, right? So like, as far as the writing is concerned, it really was interesting, but it was also frustrating and confusing, and I was like, it was very dark and depressing. It was hard to read. Like, honestly, the first part was hard to read, but basically the book starts out, she's confused. The way that I kind of pictured it in my head is she woke up in this thing similar to like the Matrix, where you wake up and you're just like, what's going on? I don't think that's exactly what it looked like, but she wakes up in this thing and she ends up getting taken out of it. And then there's people that are trying to find out who she is because her documents have been mixed up and they don't know who she is and they don't understand why she doesn't have her memories, right? So then it comes to be that she gets put in the house of the High Reeve. The High Reeve is the second in command of this necromantic army, and he is supposed to do this thing. I think it's called animancy, if I remember correctly. But basically, he is supposed to try and look through her mind and figure out her memories and understand why she doesn't have these memories, and try and figure out why is it that this person has had their memories taken away, because they're assuming that because her memories have been taken away, she must be very, very important. And they're confused because when they look at the documents, she just seemed to be a healer that really was not that important to the Eternal Flame, the other faction and all of that stuff, right? And so, that's really what the first part of the book is. And it really does get very dark. And I, again, as someone that had no idea what this book was, I had no idea what I was getting into. And I didn't realize that this was kind of like I don't want to say that it's a romantasy, but romance is a big, big part of this book, especially once you get into like part 2 and stuff like that. But, there ends up being some really, really intense things that happen in part 1. So, spoilers, obviously, we're going to be getting into spoilers in this video. So if you haven't read the book and you want to, I would click off the video, as well as like trigger warnings. We're going to be talking about some very intense things that happen to Helena. It's pretty dark, right? So basically, like the big, bad, terrible thing that happens in part 1 that a lot of people talk about is that Helena ends up getting raped, right? So Cain Farron, who is the High Reeve, who is the person that is supposed to be taking care of her and finding out all of her memories, he is basically forced, is what it's kind of said, by the one person that's above him in this army. Well, at the time, he wasn't the High Reeve, but whatever, right? So, no, I think he was. I don't know. But he is basically forced to rape her because there is this, repopulation program, and if he doesn't do it, Helena, is going to get sent off to this other place, and she's just going to be continually SA'd by multiple different men, right? And so he doesn't really want that to happen. You kind of find out later why that is, but he's basically forced to do that. So again, and this is all happening in the first section of the book. And again, the first section of the book, it's incredibly dark. Like, I don't really know how to put it other than that. And it was like, as far as me reading it, I was like, Jesus, like I was not expecting this. Like, as far as, because if you base it off of like what you read, if you know nothing about this book and you just read the inside sleeve and the back of it and you're like, okay, necromancy, it's going to be kind of dark, but you just don't think it's going to be that, and so, part 1, very, very rough. And like, there's other things that are going on. There's a magic system. And that was something that I really struggled with, was understanding how it worked. I didn't there's this term resonance that's used time and time again in the book, and I had never fully understood what it was. I still don't really understand it. I don't know how it really works. It seems that some people can kind of just do things and some people can't, and that is what it is, that was kind of confusing. But maybe I'm being a little bit overly critical about that because, I recently read Mistborn, the first 3 in the series, and I really liked that magic system. But again, I know that a lot of people say Brandon Sanderson is like the king and goat of hard magic systems. And so I think comparing it to that maybe isn't very fair. But there was, I was just very confused. Basically, when it came to the magic system, I was just like, cool, it's a magic. That's what it is. Like, it has nothing to do with logic. It's magic. Don't worry about it. So that's kind of how I went about that. Because that's what I did with Mistborn as well. At the start, I didn't really understand it, but then I started to figure it out. I never really figured out this magic system. But then we get into part 2, and part 2 for me is when the book got significantly better, for me again, right? Because basically part 2 is a flashback, I guess, but it tells you everything that has happened in those 3 years of Helena's memory loss. And you find out that she was a healer, but she was also very close friends with Luke Holdfast, who I guess is supposed to be like Harry Potter in Manacled, right? So he's like the chosen one, right? So she was really close friends with him. And, she was very intertwined with the Eternal Flame. And she was a healer, but she was, close friends and confidants with the Holdfast and like all of these other very important families in the Eternal Flame. And so while maybe she was just a healer, her actual, understanding of the Eternal Flame and the things that she knew and the things that she did was actually a lot bigger of a deal, right? And so you start to learn a little bit more about her relationship with that. And then you find out during this part 2 that she ended up basically getting traded, and she has been completely used by the Eternal Flame. She is basically given to Cain, Farron, the person that she ends up with in part 1, as like, he's going to spy on he ends up being like a double agent, but he ends up basically spying on the necromancy army and letting the Eternal Flame know a bunch of secrets. But he basically demands that he has Helena as basically like she gives up everything and she has to do anything that he says. And she basically agrees to it because, the Eternal Flame is basically saying like, well, if you really truly will do anything for us, you will do this, right? And I really did like that part of the book where it did a really good job about not just being black and white, and there was a lot of gray area. And even in the good guys, right, the Eternal Flame, there were some very, very, very crappy, evil people that used and abused anyone that they could. And a lot of the stories that they would tell the other people in the Eternal Flame, the soldiers and the other, magicians and people that fought for them and just the people that were not part of the army, but that were just being protected by the Eternal Flame, you realize that a lot of the stories they would tell were not actually true. And there was actually a lot of other stuff that was going on behind the scenes that they were not letting you know. But one of the things that I really struggled with, and the relationship that I never fully felt was completely fleshed out, which makes sense now that I realize that this was based off of Harry Potter, which has tons of books, was the supposed relationship between Helena, and Luke. Because basically the book just said they were best friends, and they just expected you to believe it. There was not that much building on this friendship. And so I never, while I was like, okay, well, this Luke guy, he seems pretty cool, I guess, and nice, and it seems like they have a relationship, them being best friends and her doing, and she endures so much terrible stuff for Luke, right? And I was just like, why? I don't get it. Why are you this relationship? I'm not understanding. So that was the one thing that I kind of struggled with. But, during this part 2, you start to learn so much about what was going on. And Helena ends up having to basically go meet with Cain multiple times, constantly, right? And the relationship at the start, again, I was like, why? I was confused. I was like, wait, so Cain did know her closer than he made it seem in part 1. So I was like, okay, so we're going to learn a little bit more about that, which I thought was interesting, right? So she ends up going to him and they start training, and he's at first it was supposed to be basically he would just give her information to bring to the higher ups of the Eternal Flame, and that was supposed to be it. But then obviously things start happening, and then that's when the romance stuff kind of started happening, because at first she's saying, well, I'm basically going to make Cain feel like he likes me and loves me so I can use that against him, right? That's kind of her plan. I'm obviously simplifying this a lot. But then they end up, through, again, part 2 is the most of the book. Part 2 is probably 700 pages, maybe 600 pages. It's the vast majority of the book is this part 2 section, right? And I was kind of confused because I thought that there would be more going back and forth between the present and then the past. That didn't really happen. It was just part 1, part 2 is the bulk of the book, which happened, quote unquote, in the past. And then part 3 happens, right? And so I was a little confused because I was like, okay, I thought maybe they would start tying things in, but that didn't really start happening. But yeah, in part 2, you start to learn a little bit more about this stuff, and you learn what's going on with the war and why the Eternal Flame seems to really struggle. And I thought that it was interesting kind of seeing that the Eternal Flame, a lot of the reason that they would struggle was because they would refuse to do the things that this necromantic army would do. And the biggest part of that is necromancy and like doing that kind of magic. They were just completely against it, when if they would have maybe done that, they maybe would have been able to, survive a little bit more, have a little bit more of a fight in them, but they just weren't able to do that. They refused to, and there was a lot of stories as to why they couldn't do that. And there's all this lore, which didn't really make much sense to me. But again, I think it would have probably made more sense in Manacled because of how there was so, Harry Potter is so rich and there's so many different books and stories that you can pull from. But with this, it was that was one of my biggest gripes, was that it felt like almost this is a book 2 in a series, because it was it kept being things being mentioned that I was like, what? Am I supposed to know what this is? Am I supposed to understand this? I really don't fully get it. It really felt like that. And that's happened to me before, where I read a book and then I realized, oh, it doesn't say it's in a series, but it's definitely correlated, and they'll call stuff back, but that's besides the point. So that was something that was confusing for me and a little bit frustrating. But again, so part 2, Helena and Cain, the big section of that is just exploring their relationship, and you start to learn, they start to get closer. They start to realize, oh, we're actually quite similar. You know how it goes, right? We have a lot of things in common, and then they end up, falling in love. Helena ends up saving his life a couple times, which shouldn't happen because he's supposed to be undead, which means he can't ever die. But that ends up, or I don't know if it's undead is a term, but he's supposed to not be able to die because of, basically he swore his allegiance to the High Necromancer, or Moreau, I think is his name. And he makes it so these people are basically, you can cut their arm off and it'll regenerate kind of thing, right? And so, but you end up finding out that Cain is basically being tortured by this person, and you find out that he actually hates Moreau and he hates this army because of something that happened with his mom, and he blames them for, killing his mom. And so he basically doesn't care about anyone other than himself. That's pretty much his story, is he does not care about anyone. The necromancer, the Eternal Flame, he doesn't care about any of them. All he cares about is himself. And he ends up, it's kind of clear that he ends up kind of reminds me of Twilight. He imprints himself on someone. And he ended up imprinting himself. They don't say that in the book, but he imprints himself on Helena. And, their relationship, you start to learn more about their relationship. And then you start to, you start to connect some of the dots, and you start to understand, okay, so that, the rape that happened in part 1, it almost feels even dirtier, right? Because obviously that probably was not very fun for Cain in this situation. But I don't know, it was just tough because, again, Cain, I think they try to write him in a way that you can almost feel bad for him, but so many of the things that he did and he does in the book are these irredeemable things that you can't ever come back from. And I think that's, for me, it kind of fell flat. I was I'm never really going to be yeah, dude, Cain, I get you, brother. It was I still don't really feel like you're a very good person, but it was almost but Helena likes you and I like her. So I guess it's cool. That's kind of the vibe that I got. But during part 2, you start to learn all this stuff. And then part 3 comes. I'm skipping a lot. I'm trying not to make this video 3,000 years long, but and then part 3 comes up, and part 3 is basically Helena comes, she starts to realize, oh my God, I actually love Cain. Oh my God, all of this, I understand, and I remember all of the things that happened. And then part 3 is them trying to get Helena, and Helena is trying to get Cain as well, but away from the situation, to escape, right? Escape this situation, because by the time part 3 happens, you know, the necromancy army, they have won. The eternal flame is gone. Everyone is dead. Like, that's kind of what happened, right? And, you know, the way that it ends is actually very positive, at least for Helena and Cain, because, you know, again, I am spoiling it, but, you know, they get away. They're able to escape and they're able to flee. They end up actually having a child. That's a big part of the story as well. And they're able to escape and basically live happily ever after. And there's a ton of side characters as well. And that was another thing that I was kind of struggling with. I was like, wait, who's this person? And I don't understand. Wait, why is this person doing this thing? And this person seems to be doing that thing. And what's going on here? Who is that? Why is it important that they died? I didn't really feel connected to them. But again, a lot of that stuff I think would have made a lot more sense if I understood, oh, okay, so that's supposed to be this person in Harry Potter that I've seen. You know, I never really read, I don't think I've ever read a full Harry Potter book, if I'm being completely honest. I've watched the movies, but that's about it. I'm sorry. But, you know, I know the characters, right? And so I think that all of that stuff would have hit a little bit harder for me, but I don't know, because I've seen some reviews of people that have, like, you know, obviously like Harry Potter and they really liked Manacled, and they're like, I don't really love how it's, you know, this person's arc is treated and blah, blah, blah. So I don't know if it would have been better if I knew or not. But, you know, some of the other issues that I had was when it came to the whole rape thing, it just felt like it was such a short period of the book, but then they kind of bring it up constantly throughout the book, you know, especially towards the end. And from what I've seen with other reviews, I guess in Manacled, it's a much bigger section, which I think would be very difficult for me to read personally. Definitely would not be enjoyable to read that, because I definitely didn't even enjoy the amount that was in this book as far as that. So I don't know. I'm not sure what the answer would be if the answer would be to take it out. I mean, I don't want to say you should have more of this in the book, but I think that it would have made more sense just because it ends up being such a big plot line, because again, Helena ends up getting pregnant. They're trying to save the baby. You know, that ends up being a big part of it. And she's pregnant because of the essay that happened. And so it ends up just being like, okay, like I understand that this is a big deal and they bring it up so much, but it was such a small section of the book that you're almost like, oh yeah, that happened. I forgot, you know, which maybe sounds terrible, but I hope that, you know, I'm not trying to be insensitive, but it was just a little, you know, there was just some things that felt a little loosey-goosey. Like there were things that it felt like maybe it tried to be very sensitive to the subject, but at the end of the day, it just, I don't know, it kind of fell flat for me. It felt like it wanted to talk about that stuff, but it also didn't really want to talk about it too much, which I maybe I understand, because obviously, again, there are going to be other people that are like me. They're going to pick this book up and just see, oh, that looks cool. It's about necromancy. Okay. And then you're reading it like, oh my God. Right. And so if it's like 14 chapters of just that stuff happening, you're just going to be like, what is this? Right. So maybe that was a conversation that Sinlin, you had with their publisher or something. I don't know for sure, where they kind of toned it down a little bit, but it was just interesting to tone it down while still keeping it in there even a little bit. Right. So it was difficult, but I mean, honestly, I know that maybe it sounds like I'm being completely negative, and I don't want to be, because I did finish this book and I am happy that I read it. I think that it's a story that is very interesting. I think it's one of those things that obviously I am a dude that likes reading like kind of like basic fantasy stuff and then like sci-fi stuff and thrillers as well. There's some thrillers back there. I'm not really at all interested in romance in any book at all. Like it's just not something that I like reading. Maybe that has to do with some scars that I have from the past. I don't know. But whenever there's romance in books, it's not my cup of tea. And so I understand that maybe this book just isn't for me. So I don't want to, crap on the book and be like, if you like it, you're, a degenerate. That's definitely not how I feel. I just think it's one of those things that it wasn't fully for me. I ended up rating this on, I've been using this app called Fable, and I think I rated this like a 3.5. So it's not like it was like I thought it was terrible. It was just not, a 5 out of 5 for me. Like when I think of like some of my favorite books that I've read, like Mistborn, that whole series, like that really hit for me. So, I don't know if that will help anyone out there, but I just wanted to share, my experience reading all of Alchemized, not realizing that it was a Harry Potter fan fiction. Started out as that, and it was kind of like adapted from that, because once I finished the book, because I don't like to watch reviews most of the time of books at all before I read them, like even if it's just a non-spoiler, like, hey, check this out. Obviously I come across those at times, and sometimes it gets me to read them, but I really like to just go into a bookstore and vibe out, and maybe find something that seems interesting to me. And so that's kind of what happened with this book. And I just had no idea what I was getting into. And so, take everything that I'm saying with a grain of salt. I'm assuming if you're watching this, you've either read it or you're interested in reading it. And so, a little bit about the story. And so that will probably help you with just understanding, okay, I get the situation, and I get the story, I get the, what's being told here, and the vibes and stuff like that. But yeah, I just wanted to share my thoughts. This is my first ever like full length book review on YouTube. I've been doing them on like on short form and stuff like that, but I like to yap. I always have more to say. So I just figured, you know what? I have this second channel, might as well talk about it. So I want to do more book reviews. I have been reading. In the past year, I've really found a love for it, which for me is a big deal because, I have ADHD. I grew up and I was in special ed classes, and I really struggled with school. And so reading was always one of those things that I was like, I'll never enjoy it. And I've tried for many, many times to get into reading, and I've never been able to do it. But this past probably year, I've read the most books I think I've ever read. So and I want to talk about them. So I think that's what I'll do here. If you guys have any recommendations of books that you think I should read, I would love to hear them. If you did read Alchemized, I would love to hear your thoughts. I would love, I just would love to talk. I would love to hang out with more people that are into books, because I don't have that many people to talk about this stuff with. And those are my thoughts. So yeah, let me know what you think. Peace.